Welcome to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Podcast. My name is Will Frantz, and I'm here to help you improve your training so you can have more fun out on the trails. Hi, welcome back or welcome to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Podcast or Facebook group, wherever you may be listening to this. If you find the following information useful, I would really appreciate if you shared it with somebody or did the rate and review thing. If you're listening to this on Spotify or Apple or whatever, it apparently helps. I don't know why it helps, but I'd really appreciate it. So let's get into it today. Topic is recovery runs or recovery efforts. There is a wide range of opinions when it comes to recovery runs or recovery training. And I think there's some very reasonable and understandable confusion when we're looking at what this goal even means. Now, for most of us, a lot of the time a recovery run or recovery effort is going to involve a good amount of walking. And that is okay because we're really trying to keep the heart rate pretty low. If we were going to use a 5-zone model, and I'm not a big heart rate coach, so this is not necessarily how I judge someone's recovery work, but we probably really want to keep it in that zone 1 space where your heart rate's up from resting. It is a little elevated, but we're not cranking on it. You're not even in zone 2. It's just your blood's moving a little more, and we're getting some work in and giving some stimulus to your body to recover. And there is a bunch of evidence showing that some level of activity does improve faster recovery. And the key here is to keep that activity level low. So if we're going to be looking at something like strength training, this would often be very light weight or body weight or band work. If your hamstrings are hammered from deadlifts or Romanian deadlifts or seated hamstring curls, one of the best things we can do is actually stimulate the hamstrings in the 20 to 25 rep range with a band, where we grab a band in each hand, stand on the band, and then do some banded Romanian deadlifts. If you don't have a band, we could do a waiter's bow, which is exactly the same movement except without any stimulus. And doing that 20-ish times promotes some blood flow to the area. It promotes a little hormonal signaling to the area, and it will actually help you recover a little faster. Same with running, where if we're kind of worked at the end of a big weekend, we might run at a pace that probably involves some walking depending on how fit you are. And for me, it does involve quite a bit of walking. I will usually do these recovery efforts with my dog, and we'll go jog for a little bit. My heart rate will come up, and then we'll walk, and he'll sniff around and do some things. My heart rate will come back down, and we'll just repeat that for 20 to 40 minutes. It's the other thing. It shouldn't be super long. We're not trying to go out for a full hour and a half of recovery work. This is probably going to be more in the 20 to maybe 45 minute range, but probably 20 to 30 for most people at a pace that is just really easy. You probably even sing a song. I think when we talk about zone 2 training or that aerobic threshold space, that is often underplayed, where people say you should be able to sing a song. You should be able to have a conversation where the other person wouldn't even know you were running. And this is a cue that over the years I have really greatly adapted to learning more about it and doing some experimentation and listening to people like Peter Attia, who do a lot of zone 2 work with their clientele. And zone 2, yes, you could hold a conversation. The conversation would not be interrupted by your activity, but you probably wouldn't want to be having that conversation, and the other person would know you were doing something. So if you're having that conversation, you wouldn't be able to speak in a full paragraph like I'm able to do right now. It might sound a little more like this, where you're a little winded and you have to take more breaths than you really want to, but it's not impeding the conversation. You're just breathing a little heavier, and someone can tell that you're doing some work, right? That's probably what zone 2 would sound like, whereas zone 1 would be more how I sound right now, where I'm just breathing smoothly. A lot of people will talk about breathing through your nose, which is a really good indicator if you don't have messed up nasal passages? I do, so not always a good metric for me. If I get my heart rate really elevated at all, it is a struggle for me to breathe through my nose. But if you don't have history of like a deviated septum and nasal surgery, then breathing solely through your nose might actually be a really good metric there for zone 1 recovery stuff. It is also probably a good sign if you could sing a song. So if you can maintain enough breath capacity to be able to sing, you're almost also certainly in this like zone 1 or recovery space. Now, if we are on some kind of different apparatus, let's say a bike, you may push a little harder due to the muscles and stuff being a little different from a usage perspective. So on a bike, if you don't bike a lot, then the effort you're going to put through your legs might be a little higher in order to like still get your heart rate moving a little bit, but you're just going to feel it in your legs. You shouldn't be like panting or sucking air, right? We'd still want, if your aerobic threshold were like 150, probably means that your recovery would be like 120 or below, somewhere in there. And this is where you wouldn't necessarily like really feel like you're doing a ton of work from an aerobic perspective. But if you're on a new apparatus like a bike or a stair stepper or something like that, then we'd be going pretty slow, but your legs might feel it because they're working a little differently than we'd be doing on our runs. And this is one of the big distinguishing factors between like recovery work and skill practice, right? So you've also probably heard me, if you've listened to me for any real amount of time, talk about how like 10 to 15 minutes really does count. And some of that is this like low, easy work. But depending on you, your heart rate might not even like fully regulate. It might actually start out really high in the first 10 minutes of your run and then start to come down and find its like sweet spot in the next, let's call it 40 to 50 minutes of an hour-long run. And if that's you, those first 10 to 15 minutes might not be recovery work from a cardiovascular standpoint, but it's still really worthwhile because it's practicing the skill of running and getting moving and seeing like how your cadence and your gait feels and just using it as skill practice. Whereas if we're doing more of a recovery work, we really do want that probably to be in the like 15 to 30 minute range. Easy, again, super easy breathing, able to hold a solid conversation where the other person may or may not even know that you're running. And if we're looking at like paces, it may be multiple minutes faster than any pace you would usually do during a training session. So a lot of the time we end up with this recovery idea because we look at the training of elite athletes, which is super useful. But if we take someone like Kipchoge or DeWalter or Walmsley or whoever, their race pace is probably faster, actually certainly faster than my like lactate threshold pace. They can just do more work. So their recovery pace might be a 10-minute mile because their race pace is a like 6-7 in the terms of Kipchoge, a 4.5-minute mile for 26 straight miles, right? So it is very reasonable that a 9-minute mile is a recovery pace for that man. Whereas for me, my race pace is a lot slower than that. So my recovery pace will also be a lot slower than that. And as such, there's going to be a good amount of walking, and I'm probably going to cycle back and forth between those things. Now, like the walking and running when I say those things. Now, one myth that has been propagated, and this isn't a bad thing to do if you like it, and this is a habit you're in, I'd like you not to stop because it isn't doing you any harm. But there's this old idea where for recovery work, you would make sure that you eat beforehand because the recovery work is going to help like expedite pushing the carbs or glycogen or whatever into your muscles, push the protein into your muscles. We don't actually see that over the long term. If we take a 24-hour rest period anyway, then it's not really going to matter. This could matter if you're doing something like 2-a-days where you do work in the morning, like a workout or hard session in the morning, and then you do a recovery effort in the evening, and then you have another like harder effort the following morning. You would want to eat before that recovery session, but that's more just about staying fed and giving your body something to use in the moment than it is about like pushing glycogen into your muscles through movement, right? So that is an older myth that isn't necessarily applicable unless you're doing multiple 2-a-days or like different sessions end on end. And that just holds true to the fact that glycogen is on a like 24 to 36 hour replenishment cycle in the body. And if you're doing 2-a-days, then we need to game that a little bit so you can still keep your glycogen up and perform well. But there isn't much to the old myth of using a recovery session to push glycogen into a new spot. It just doesn't really hold up. That said, let's keep the effort low. Walk if you need to for recovery. It can just be a walk in general. It can be a walk with a hill, walk with the dog. I personally think that like really low heart rate work where you go out for a brisk walk with your dog or your spouse or your kids after a meal, it helps you digest better and gets you moving a little bit, is a really valuable, healthy thing to do. But you don't need to go out and like push the work. And in fact, if we are trying to go like do a bunch of work when we have a recovery session programmed, we're probably missing the point and creating extra stimulus instead of recovery. Hope that made sense. I'll be back with another one of these soon. Thank you for listening to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Podcast. Honestly, I'm still surprised and honored that anybody wants to hear what I have to say, so thank you. To be clear, not a doctor, nor a registered dietitian, or any other kind of medical professional. I'm a personal trainer, a nutrition coach, and a running coach, and I have a passion for training trail runners. You should always speak with a qualified medical professional before making any changes to your training or nutrition program. If you enjoyed the podcast or found it helpful, please take a second to leave a rating or review. I'd really appreciate it. Or you could just share it with someone for whom you think it might be helpful. I make these kinds of things in order to provide more quality, free resources to people, so the more people who hear it, the better. If you want more of this information, please head to the Trail and Ultra Running Training group on Facebook, where we discuss all aspects of training so you can have more fun doing the sport that you love. Thank you again for listening.